Some fights make history. Others just leave you scratching your head. The 10 most pointless UFC title shots ever highlights moments where the cage door closed and fans were left wondering why the fight was ever booked. It's not about the skills of the fighters. It's about timing, circumstances, and decisions that made little to no sense. These matchups didn't just lack logic. They often came with consequences that hurt careers, confused rankings, and exposed priorities behind the scenes. 10th, a dying brand's final breath. UFC 29 was held in Tokyo, Japan, during one of the darkest times in the sport's history. The UFC, under the original owners SEG, was nearly bankrupt. Regulations and bans across the United States were choking the company, and financially, they were at the breaking point. As a last effort, they created a separate brand called UFCJ to attract the Japanese market. UFC 29 would be part of that push, with Tito Ortiz defending his title against Yuki Kondo. While Kondo had experience in pancrase, he wasn't a real contender for the UFC belt. The fight ended quickly, with Ortiz dominating in under 2 minutes. The bout meant nothing to the rankings or the fans. Kondo never returned to the UFC and lost his next major fight. Meanwhile, UFC's efforts in Japan failed completely. The company was sold shortly after, and it would be over a decade before the UFC made another big move into Japan. This title fight, meant as a lifeline, became a sad ending to an era. It was more about surviving the moment than delivering a meaningful contest. A pointless fight, born from desperation, marked the end of Esegi's version of the UFC. 9. Dillashaw's shoulder disaster. TJ Dillashaw's return to the title picture came with more risk than reward.
Yeah, it popped out right away. I gotta apologize to the weight class. Kind of held it up. I completely blew my shoulder out the end of April. As soon as I started getting...
And fans didn't know the half of it until later. After a long suspension for banned substances, TJ fought only once in nearly 3 years. That win over Corey Sandhagen was razor-thin, and most believed he lost. But he still got a shot at Aljamain Sterling's title. What the public didn't know was that TJ's shoulder was badly injured, so much so that it reportedly popped out around 20 times during training camp. He couldn't even throw his left hand properly. From the moment the fight began, it was clear he couldn't compete at his best. Sterling dominated him, and the match quickly became one-sided. Afterwards, TJ admitted how badly injured he had been before stepping into the cage. It wasn't just a pointless fight, it was a damaging one. For Sterling, it wasn't a true test. For the division, it stalled progress. For Dillashaw, it was a mistake that ended his chances at reclaiming gold. Letting the fight happen was a failure of judgment. A broken fighter walked into a cage when he shouldn't have, and the result helped no one. 8. Pride Picks. Popularity over merit. In Pride FC, title fights were rare events.
I don't.
The UFC, this is what I understand about some Asian businesses, or at least Japanese businesses.
So when one happened, it should have carried real weight. But that wasn't the case when Wanderlei Silva defended his belt against Hiromitsu Kanehara. Kanehara was popular in Japan, especially among fans of shoot-style wrestling. He had charisma, but he didn't have the record to back up a title shot. His last victory was over a fighter with a 2-5 record, and before that, he had lost 3 in a row, even if the losses were to big names. The promotion booked the fight for star power, not competition. Silva dominated Kanehara from start to finish. It wasn't competitive, and it didn't prove anything. Looking back, Kanehara's record only got worse. He lost 12 of his next 13 fights. Pride's decision showed how fan popularity could override actual rankings or fight results. It created a title defense that didn't challenge the champion and didn't elevate the division. Kanehara never returned to that level. It was a fight that looked good on a poster, but didn't belong in a title history book. A clear example of how business sometimes outweighs sport. 7. Sean O'Malley's unearned rematch. When Sean O'Malley was granted a rematch against Merab Dvalishvili just 9 months after losing the title,
yeah, it feels really good to be healthy. That's all you can ask for going into a fight, is feeling.
it left fans and fighters confused. He hadn't fought anyone else since losing. He didn't earn the rematch with a dominant performance or a comeback win. In fact, he had done absolutely nothing to justify another shot. The first fight wasn't close. There was no controversy, no injury, and no unfinished business. It wasn't like Anderson Silva or other champions who lost after long reigns. O'Malley's title win was already debated, and his defense was shaky. But the UFC needed a headliner, and O'Malley still had a big name. That was enough to push him back into the spotlight. The rematch didn't just feel unearned, it hurt his future chances. As long as Merab holds the belt, O'Malley's chances at getting another opportunity are gone. One title shot closed the door on many others. It was a gamble for hype and sales, and for fans watching closely, it exposed how star power can sometimes outweigh rankings, skills, or common sense. This rematch was booked for business, not sport. 6. Darren Till's fast-tracked fall. Darren Till had momentum. He was young, exciting, and full of confidence. After beating Donald Cerrone and narrowly edging out Stephen Thompson,
still going to be the greatest, I know that. You know, I just spoke to Woodley backstage and he's lost. John Jones has lost.
The UFC fast-tracked him to a title shot against Tyron Woodley. But the timing was all wrong. Till had missed weight for the Thompson fight, and many believed he didn't deserve the decision win. More importantly, there were other contenders like Colby Covington waiting. But the UFC needed a main event, and Till had star potential, so they threw him in with Woodley. The result was brutal. Till was overwhelmed and submitted quickly. It wasn't just a loss, it was a complete shutdown. After that fight, Till's career momentum collapsed. He struggled with weight classes, suffered more losses, and never got close to a title shot again. That early push, meant to make a star, backfired. Instead of building him up slowly, they burned him out. It's a clear case of opportunity arriving too soon. One fight changed everything. The UFC rushed a prospect who wasn't ready, and the result was a career detour that he never fully recovered from. 5. Jones versus Miotic, a legacy letdown. John Jones and Stipe Miocic were both legends, but when their title fight was booked, the timing was off. Jones hadn't fought in years. Stipe had been inactive even longer, coming off a knockout loss. Meanwhile, the UFC had a new interim champion in Tom Aspinall, young, active, and ready. Instead of giving Aspinall the spotlight, they chose legacy over logic. The promotion hyped the Jones-Stipe bout as historic, but it was two aging fighters far removed from their prime. The fight didn't happen as scheduled, because Jones got injured. When it finally did, the outcome was one-sided. Jones dominated. Stipe's title dreams ended with barely a punch thrown. It wasn't competitive. It didn't answer questions. It delayed the division's future. Fans were promised history, but got a mismatch. For Aspinall and the rest of the division, it was wasted time. For Jones and Stipe, it was a moment that didn't match their legacies. The UFC booked a big name fight, but in doing so, delivered one of the most pointless title shots in recent memory. 4th, Masvidal's redundant second chance. Jorge Masvidal exploded in 2019. His flying knee knockout went viral. His personality was electric. The UFC knew they had a star. So when he lost to Kamaru Usman in a title fight he took on short notice, they saw an opening. They booked a rematch. But there was a problem. In their first fight, Usman had dominated. Masvidal didn't win a round, and in the time after, Usman fought and beat another top contender. Masvidal? He sat out. No fights, no new wins. Still, he got a second shot. This time, it ended worse. Usman knocked him out cold in the second round. The image went viral again, but not in Masvidal's favor. The fight didn't make sense on paper, and the result proved it. Masvidal's momentum died that night. His days of headlining title fights ended. It was a matchup created from hype, not merit. Fans were promised a war, but got a rerun. The UFC pushed a rematch that nobody in the rankings asked for. The result shut the door on one of the sport's fastest rising stars. A gamble that didn't pay off. Third, Bisping's hometown favor. Michael Bisping shocked the world by knocking out Luke Rockhold to win the middleweight title. It was short notice. It was historic. Then came the strange part. For his first title defense, Bisping asked to fight Dan Henderson. The UFC agreed. But Henderson was ranked number 13 and had lost 6 of his last 9 fights. He had scored a surprising knockout on the same night Bisping won the belt, and that was enough to book a title shot. The UFC planned the fight in Manchester, Bisping's hometown. The fans loved it, but the rankings didn't. Top contenders like Yoel Romero and Robert Whittaker were overlooked. The fight itself was exciting, but it was built on nostalgia, not competition. Bisping avoided real threats. After Henderson, instead of defending against top fighters, he took a long break and fought Georges St-Pierre, who hadn't fought in years. That decision ended his title reign. The fight with Henderson felt like a personal favor, not a proper defense. It gave fans a show, but it didn't serve the division. A champion's legacy deserves more than a popularity vote. 2. Covington's return without earning it. Colby Covington was a strong title challenger in 2018. He won the interim belt and gave Kamaru Usman one of his toughest fights. But what happened later confused everyone. After losing twice to Usman and beating Jorge Masvidal in a grudge match, Covington disappeared from action. Nearly 2 years passed. Then, out of nowhere, he was given a title fight against Leon Edwards. He hadn't fought in nearly 2 years. He hadn't beaten any contenders since. But the UFC didn't want Belal Muhammad in the spotlight, so they turned to Colby. The build-up was big, but the fight was flat. Colby delivered one of the worst title performances in history. He was hesitant, lacked energy, and never threatened Leon. The match exposed the problem with skipping the line. It was a main event without a meaningful road behind it. Fans were frustrated. Fighters in the rankings were ignored. Covington had once been one of the division's most exciting rivals. But this return, with no fights or wins to support it, showed how favoritism can ruin momentum. It was a title shot that never should have happened. 1. Milletch's mismatched reign. Pat Milletch was a key figure in early MMA. His gym changed the sport, but his title reign was filled with strange choices. He defended the welterweight belt 4 times, but against opponents who weren't ready or ranked. One opponent had just 1 professional fight. Another was only 20 years old and barely experienced. Some of them had just lost fights outside the UFC. Meanwhile, Milletch himself lost 3 bouts during his reign, though they were in other promotions. Still, it created confusion. He held the UFC belt while losing elsewhere. His final title defense was against an unranked fighter in Japan. Then, Carlos Newton returned from Pride and beat him for the belt. Pat's contributions to the sport can't be denied, but the level of his title challengers was weak. It was a reflection of the UFC's struggle during that era. They didn't have enough depth. The sport was still growing, but it made his championship run feel hollow in hindsight. A reign remembered more for what it lacked than what it achieved.